皆さんこんにちは。このパートでは明瞭簡潔な文章を書くための方法についてマルコム先生が解説してくれます。今回のトピックは ing 形の使い方、曖昧語や無駄な語を使わないこと、程よい長さの文章を書くことです。ワークブックをお持ちの方は16ページから27ページをご覧ください。それではマルコム先生、お願いします。
So welcome to part 3, which is concerned with writing clearly and concisely. And here are the topics, just two. Why do we write clearly and concisely? And how do we do it? How to write clearly and concisely. So why do we write clearly and concisely? There are various reasons. One of them is to effectively communicate your research findings. Your research is going to be written in your thesis or in a paper or more than one paper, and you have to be able to write it in such a way that your thesis committee can understand it, your supervisor can understand it, and ultimately the readers of your paper will understand it. So that's a very good reason to write clearly and concisely. If your paper is submitted to a journal, then reviewers will look at your paper. And reviewers too must be able to understand what you've been talking about in your paper. Reviewers are not necessarily experts in your field. Some people would say that you should be able to describe your work to anybody. Now that's a little bit extreme, but you should be able to make it sufficiently clear and concise that most people can understand your writing. And there's another very good reason why that should be, because a lot of people are reading journal papers in English, and those readers are not necessarily native speakers of English. And so you write your papers in such a way that a broad audience of native English speakers and non-native English speakers can understand what you're talking about. So how do we do that? How do we write clearly and concisely? And the first step is to put the main emphasis of your writing in a sentence at the beginning of the sentence or at the beginning of a paragraph. And this has more impact. This isn't how you necessarily write in Japanese, because the sentence structure is different in Japanese. But in English, we start with the main emphasis at the beginning. And if you look at this example here, which is from a real paper, source number 2, and the sources are listed at the ends of each part of this OCW. Before, one of the greatest threats to. Before you get to giant panda here, there are several words that we don't know where it's leading. But eventually we get to habitat loss at the end of the sentence. So why not start the sentence with habitat loss? Start the sentence with the main point. Habitat loss is one of the greatest threats to giant panda survival. It's important to have the main emphasis at the beginning. The second way of making your writing more concise and clear is to remove as much as possible ing words. Eating, reading are two examples of ing words that you can replace with a noun or an infinitive. So look at this example here. The sentence starts with the word living. That is not a very emphatic word. Sure, it's at the beginning of the sentence. So living in a Canadian university dormitory can be a stressful experience. The sentence goes on, talking about foreign students. But here are two possible answers. To live, which is an infinitive, or life, which is a noun, make the sentences more emphatic. To live in a Canadian dormitory or life in a Canadian dormitory makes the sentence have more impact. Now you might ask, well, what is the difference between these two answers? In English, we sometimes have more than one answer for the same exercise. And in this case, to live discusses eating your food and drinking your drinks, and not too much more. These are things that we need for life. But life in a Canadian university dormitory is much broader than just eating and drinking. If you're in a Canadian dormitory, you have a roommate, you have to be able to find time and a place to study, and there may be noise and all sorts of distractions that are part of life. So life itself is much more than the basics of eating and drinking and sleeping. A third way of making the writing clearer is to not use subjective words, especially in science. Interesting, important, exciting, they are all subjective words. They are all words that are the opinion of the writer. And that opinion may not be shared by other people. So remove subjective words and you make your writing clearer. Let's try that. This is a sentence about plankton, little creatures living in the oceans. We made the interesting discovery that several species of plankton are inactive in the daytime and active at night. If we remove interesting, it doesn't change the sentence much, but it adds more clarity to the sentence. We made the discovery that several species of plankton are inactive in the daytime and active at night. So the message here is let the readers conclude that your discovery was interesting. Don't tell the readers that your discovery was interesting. Let the readers make that decision. And especially in the media, unnecessary words are included to fill out sentences. And we remove unnecessary words in science writing. So look at this sentence here. Unnecessary words, sometimes called sentence fillers, do not add any useful information. So can you see the unnecessary words in this sentence above? Yes. Any useful here. If we remove that, we get unnecessary words, sometimes called sentence fillers, do not add information. But if we look at this sentence after we removed any useful, we can see that we can also exclude this part. And we still have a perfectly good sentence. Unnecessary words do not add information. I think you'll agree that that's a clearer and certainly a much shorter sentence. So look at this sentence. It looks at first to be overwhelming, but there are many examples here of unnecessary words that we can remove. So what are some of the unnecessary words? And also there are some subjective words. What are the subjective words? And what happens if we remove the unnecessary and subjective words? So what are the unnecessary words and the subjective words in this big sentence? Well, the unnecessary words are here in red. We can see them clearly, and that is going to shorten the sentence if we remove them. The subjective words are fortunately and amazingly. These are two words that are the opinion of the writer. They don't necessarily add anything to the sentence because it may not be other people's opinion. So here's a better sentence. Mountainous areas and lack of interest in hunting have maintained Japan's biodiversity in spite of human population growth and industrial expansion. Japan's been designated as a hotspot of biodiversity. And what does this mean? It means that Japan has a very high number of species relative to areas of similar location. And the reason for that is there, geography. Japan is a string of islands that ranges between about 22 degrees north of the equator and 46 degrees north of the equator. And it also has a range of elevations as well, because there are lots of mountains in the string of islands. And so Japan has a huge biodiversity. And the last example here of how to make writing clearer and more concise is to have sentences that are intermediate in length. Sentences that are too short leave questions in people's minds. So for example, the deer died. That leaves questions about how did they die and why did they die. So it's better to add a little more information to a very short sentence like that. The deer died because of starvation during a very cold, snowy winter. That is relatively easy to do. However, if you have a huge sentence like this, it's too long and it's overwhelming for some readers. So it's better to split it into two parts. And I've shown you here where you break it into two. That. The conjunction that gives you a clue as to where to break that sentence into two parts. Now let me explain a little bit about this. Digitizing means you're going to take data and put it in digital form. It makes sense. Georeferencing refers to where a particular, in this case, soybean plant is planted. And so the georeferencing refers to the latitude and the longitude and also height above ground where it's grown. So we're told that georeferencing and digitizing the existing observations on soybeans yielded cropping calendar data sets. And then we go on to find out what cropping calendar data sets are, and they are 5 patterns. Planting. Plant is placed in the soil as a seed. It grows. It starts to vegetate. It heads up. You get finally filling of the seed pods with the soybeans, and finally harvesting. So 5 stages of growth. And if we break this big sentence into two, we have this. We have the first part, which tells the reader about how you used digital information and location information in association with the soybean cropping, and it's called a calendar data set. Then the second sentence says these being the data sets, provided 5 patterns, namely planting, vegetating, heading, filling, and harvesting. So we have 2 sentences broken in the middle by one word being replaced. So for more information about how to write clearly and concisely, I recommend that you visit section 2 of the workbook. And thank you for your attention.
いかがでしたか？不要な語句は削除することが明瞭簡潔な文章を書くためのポイントだということが分かりましたね。次のパート4では科学技術系ライティング特有の重要ポイントについてマルコム先生が解説してくれます。パート4でまたお会いしましょう。
See you in the next part!